Welcome once again to the Aftermath, and we have a special guest today, and I'm doing great. We got the sun out, even though we've had our really rigorous winter here. We've had a little bit of rain in San Diego, so we're going to survive. How are you doing, Kendra?
Nick, I do not even want to hear it. It's cold here. At least we don't have the snow like Pennsylvania and Boston got today, but the sun's out, but it is cold. So,
I understand. That's why I stay in touch with people, but all over. But you are still doing your co-parenting mentoring and still hanging in there despite the
yes.
cold and the bad weather. So thanks for being around.
Yes. Thank you, Mick. Good to see you again.
Likewise. This is the aftermath, and the purpose of the show is to educate and inspire you. Everything that is wrong with families today are the hard topics that we discuss. Both of us have been subjected to the harsh reality and trauma of custody battles, but we have not been alone. And Kendra, I want to mention also we, the parents, because that has been out there and people can have their local legislatures also screen that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. So, We the Parents is a documentary film of several parents that have come together from all over the United States. And we use the film to educate legislators and other families that are experiencing this and going through court systems around the US. We want change. We want laws changed.
And if you have not seen it, I highly encourage also seeing Kindred because it is the most moving and really exceptional part of the documentary. I know more,
Thank you, Mick.
but
Thank
yeah,
you.
very effective. If you want to know more, there's approximately 50% of divorces in the United States involve children, and a large portion of the parents attempt some form of co parenting. Studies suggest around 60 to 70% of parents intend to co parent after separation or divorce. Research indicates that many co parenting arrangements face challenges, while estimates ranging from 25 to 50% experience significant difficulties. These challenges can include communication breakdowns, conflicting parenting styles, financial difficulties, or difficulty managing children's emotions. Despite these challenges, many co parenting families function well. Studies show that children in these families have positive long term outcomes compared to those with high conflict co parenting situations. During this episode, we'll do a deep dive into a co parenting option for positive examples about how to do so and what needs to be done. We'll examine the skills you need to develop to co parent competently. By the end of this episode, you'll be better equipped to know what to do, and we encourage you to contact our special guest, who is a co parenting expert. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment with our special guest, Darlene Taylor. Welcome to The Aftermath, a podcast that rips the Band-Aid off the collective scars of divorce, custody battles, and the trauma of family drama. Kendra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart-wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. It's Darlene Taylor, who is our co-parenting expert. How are you today, Darlene?
I am great. How are you?
We're doing great. We're very excited about having you on the program today because we've got some positive examples of co-parenting, and that's really what we'd like to dive into today.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Great.
Terrific. Could you tell us a little bit about the story of your background? And also, very curious, I wanted to say this really quickly too, because your partner and I share a first name. There's no connection, but we're both named Mick. And if you're watching on video on Blue and Gold, UCLA connection as well too. But can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got this story for us today?
Yes, so I was married and co-parenting, married, got a divorce when our daughter was about 2. We were living in Ohio, and after a pretty rocky start to our co-parenting journey for a few years, we got to a really good place where we were friends and working really well together. And then about, I don't know, I guess 10 years after that, so 2019, he came to me and said, "Hey, so I have this great opportunity to coach at UCLA, and I'd really like to take the job, but I don't want to leave our daughter. Would you consider moving to California?" And I was, as I said, we'd been divorced for 10 years. That's a really big ask of someone. And we had a great life, happy, full life. That was the only place our daughter had ever lived. And it was a big move. But at the end of the day, really just it came down to what was best for our daughter. And what was best for her is to have both of us in her life consistently on a regular basis, especially at that point. She was 12. And that's just, in my opinion, a really critical time for kids. And so we all made the move to California. And so in reflecting on the move, of course, when you move to a new place, you meet new people and they're like, "Oh, so what brings you to LA?" And I'm like, "Funny story. So my ex-husband got a job and I moved." And they're like, "Are you insane?" And I'm like, "No, just trying to be a good mom." In reflecting on how we got to that place, how I got to a place where I would actually even consider a question like that, a request like that, I started thinking about all the things that we had learned and the things that we got wrong and the things that we got right, which I think are definitely more than the things we got wrong. And then I decided that I wanted to share that with people in hopes that it would be helpful to someone, because I know co-parenting, like I said, is really hard and we didn't get it right away. And I just was hoping that maybe some of the things that I learned could be a positive influence on other people. So I decided to write a book called It's Not About Us, because essentially that's really what it boils down to. When making decisions about co parenting, it's no longer about you. It's not about you at all. And if you can keep that at the center of your decision making, I think that puts you on the right track.
Sure does.
Yeah, Darlene, you're an inspiration. You and your ex, I think, are an inspiration to families out there. And especially just giving hope to them that if they're starting a divorce and it's very rocky, there is hope that you can get through and you can come to a place where you can both work together and co-parent for the best interest of the children. And that's what, like you said, that's what's most important.
And that's, I do stress that. Like, this didn't happen overnight. This did not, it was a few years of difficult difficult co-parenting. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of grief involved in divorce that I think we don't talk about a lot. It's a huge loss, and I think that a lot of times we sort of brush past that and just want to be in this next phase of our life and this next phase of our family, even though we have no idea what that's supposed to look like or how we're supposed to get there, and we're not dealing with all of these really negative, hurtful feelings. And you have to heal that stuff before you can work with this person again. And so I think that giving yourself the time and the space and the grace really to get through that and work through that and get to where you want to go is really crucial. But it definitely takes time.
So great words of wisdom right there. And I really hope that maybe one day I can get to that point with my ex as well and co parent our boys. So thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned your book, It's Not About Us. And so I just want to I'll let you give a short little plug here.
Yeah.
Um, where can they get your book? Oh, where's it available?
Available everywhere: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, mostly on online retailers. It's not in any stores, but you can get it online pretty much everywhere you can buy books. And there is actually, I'm a big journaler. I'm a therapist. That's my background. I'm a clinical social worker. So I'm a big journaler. And as a social worker, I always would give journaling assignments as homework. And so when I wrote the book, I really wanted people to be able to not only read the book and have some takeaways from the book, but figure out how to really put those into practice in their lives. So there's a companion guided journal for people that is available on Amazon. And so it's just got some prompts to help you. The subtitle of the book is A Co-Parenting Survival Guide to Taking the High Road. And that's what I call my co-parenting style, I guess, is co-parenting from the high road. And so the journal is designed to help you figure out what that means for you and what that means for your family and how to get and stay on the high road, as well as working through this the stuff, the feelings, all the things that you're working through, and taking care of yourself, because that's crucial in this whole process as well.
It is. It is. And we'll have the link in the notes, the show notes, but there's also an Audible version, right?
Yes, yeah, there's an audiobook available. Yep, and that's available on Audible and yeah, all of the platforms.
And what's unique about that is it's you, your ex, and your daughter telling your versions of the story, right?
Yes. So I wrote the book and I was thinking, as I started writing the book, I was thinking about, I wanted to make sure that he knew that I was writing the book and understood what my plan was for the book. I didn't want him to think that it was this sort of salacious tell-all thing and I was making him look bad. But I wanted him to know what I was doing and what I was hoping to accomplish. And I wanted his input on it. And so I asked him to write the foreword to the book. So I gave him the first couple of chapters of the book and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. And would you write the foreword?" And he said yes before he even read the chapters of the book. He said, "Where I feel like he's really proud of the way that we co-parent together." And he said, "Whatever I can do to be helpful." So he wrote the foreword. And then I asked our daughter to write the afterword. And to just give her perspective on what it's like to be a child of divorced parents who are not perfect but trying to do the right thing. And so she wrote the afterwards. So when we did the audiobook, they both were able to record their portions of the book and I narrated the rest of the book. So it's a really cool thing to just have us all on there.
That's really neat. And I wanted to bring that up first because I just think it's different, unique, and interesting that your family, your daughter's family did that. So that's pretty cool. So
Thank
now we can get into the meat of things here. Like,
Thank you.
sorry, I digress.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you being able to talk about it. It's
Yeah.
definitely my passion project. So
Yeah. So tell me, let's give our audience a little bit of depth here to what you have gone through and what you've learned and maybe they can find in the books.
Mhm.
What are some of the biggest challenges that co-parents face?
I would say the biggest challenge is just communication, really. You're trying to work cooperatively with someone that you more than likely have at best somewhat negative feelings and at worst just completely hostile feelings toward, and you're really trying to work. You have to figure out a way to work cooperatively with this person, and there's no telling what happened within the marriage to cause the divorce. And so being able to actually communicate with that person and get things done and be able to parent and together for your children, I think is probably the biggest challenge. And I don't specifically talk about communication in the book because I think that's just the through line with everything. And so I think for me, I felt like the biggest challenge was letting go of the idea of what our family was going to be, and being able to be at peace with that, understanding that even though it wasn't the family that I wanted or planned for, we are still a family and we're going to have to figure out how to function as one, and figure out what that's going to look like. But I think, yeah, for me, it was really just letting go of what I wanted and then trying to be intentional about what the next phase of our family, what I wanted that to look like, and what part I wanted to play in that, and what part I needed my parenting partner to play in that as well.
Mhm, mhm.
So there's some things that you have to try to do on your own, and then there's some things that you have to cooperate and also collaborate. So I'm curious, how do you, as co-parenting, then find that right balance between autonomy and collaboration?
Yeah, I think that I think was probably one of the hardest things for us, is figuring that out. I think it's when you're married and you function as a family, I think you fall into roles, and one person usually typically is the primary caregiver, but there's this level of trust because they're your partner, that there's this level of trust as a parent that they're going to make good decisions and you're just going to do, and you go along with it, right? But when you divorce, that trust is fractured. And so I think that part of it is rebuilding that trust between the two of you, as far as trusting them as a parent again, and not making decisions making decisions autonomously. You have to, anything really, any big decision that when it comes to your kids, I really think needs to be collaborated on, if that's school, if that's medical, If it's a decision that you wouldn't have made individually when you were married, then you shouldn't be making it individually now, in my opinion. So there needs to be a lot of collaboration. But I think if it's not something that if it's something that's just going on at your house, it's also about letting go of the control. You're not going to have control over what happens at your parenting partner's house, and you have to be able to be okay with that. And that's scary, I think, at first. And so, again, I think it's about getting to a point where you can separate the partner from the parent. That's something that I talk about a lot is that maybe they were a really crappy partner for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a crappy parent. And so you have to be able to look at those roles totally separately and give them the trust as a parent that you want them to give you as well. And really leaning into that trust that you had with them when you decided to start a family with them. At some point, you probably looked at this person and said, I think they'll be a good parent and let's do this. And so trying to find that space again and really just talking that out. But I think every family is different. I think it's also important to figure out what's really important to you. Maybe where your children go to school is really important to one parent and not really that important to the other parent. Then let them make that decision. It doesn't have your situation and the way that your family works doesn't have to be the same as anybody else's, and it probably won't be because everyone's family is different and everyone's needs are different. So being able to again communicate and have a really open conversation. What are the most asking each other, what are the most important pieces for you to retain in this co-parenting relationship? What do you feel like you really want dominion over versus what I want dominion over? And hopefully you can come to some sort of agreement on that.
Yeah. So many good points. And you bring up communication and trust. And I made note of that because I think that's hard in general in our lives,
Yeah.
whether it's relationships with friendships or relationships, coworkers, things like that. Then you have marriages and then you have divorces. So that's something that I think is in all parts of our life. So we just need to work on that in general is communication and trust and letting go of that control. I was mentoring somebody just a couple months ago, and she was really having problems letting go of being in charge of what's
Mhm.
happening at her ex's house, right? Trying to control every little thing. I'll pick up
Yes.
dinner, I'll pick up the kids, I'll drop them off, right? What are they
Yes.
doing tonight? Are you making sure they're doing their homework, right? Things like that. And it's
Yes.
okay, you got to let go, and you have to also let go for yourself. And I like what you said about that. You have to let go. They're okay. They're going to survive. Take that time by yourself to work on yourself and heal yourself. And so you made
Right.
lots of great points in the first couple minutes here. I want to move on to something else and switch subjects just a little bit. But what are some of the things that maybe co-parents shouldn't say in front of the children, even though you might not have control over it? But what should you
Mhm.
be aware of when you're working on yourself that maybe you shouldn't talk about in front of your children?
I don't think you should talk about money. Any of the financial stuff that's going on, I think that should be completely separate from that shouldn't be talked about in front of your children. But I feel very strongly that anything negative, anything negative about the co-parent just shouldn't about the co-parent, about their extended family, because at the end of the day, no matter what happened between the two of you, that's your child's family. Those are still their family. And the reality is, particularly when you're talking about the other parent, when a child hears you talk negatively about that parent, they feel like you're talking about a part of them because they understand that they are a piece of both of you. And that feels very personal and they internalize that. And there's just I don't even know that we can measure the kind of damage that does. And as best that you can. I've been very intentional about never saying anything negative about her dad, about his family in front of her. And that was one of the first things I said to my family members and friends as well. I was like, look, this is what we're not doing. She's never going to hear anything negative from anybody on this side of the family when it comes to her father. If you can't agree with that, if you can't abide by that, that's fine. We don't need to have you around then. You don't need to be around her. But I don't want that for her because that is extremely damaging. So I think that's probably just the hill I will die on forever is that it's just the damage is, and it's extensive and I don't know how you repair it. I
Mhm.
really don't know how you repair it.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, especially if you know that person is speaking negatively about you, especially if there's just all of this animosity. That's a really difficult thing to do.
Well, I
Oh,
think it goes back to what you were saying. Take the high road, right?
yeah.
Take the high road. Even if the other parent's doing it, you're going to take the high road.
And I think one of the things that I have a parenting coaching business, and one of the things that I ask people to think about is what kind of ask them to think about really early on is what kind of co-parent do you want to be? Who do you want to be?
Mhm.
Who do you want to be? And you need to stand in that no matter what else happens. So no matter you can't, it doesn't matter what they say, it doesn't matter what they do. If you are going to be the parent that stays on the high road, then that is where you have to stay. So all of that stuff that you can't, it's not worth it. It doesn't, it feels good momentarily, but at the end
Sure.
of the day, it's not going to be helpful for anybody. And so just going back to that, who do I want to be? For me, it was a decision. I felt very strongly that the only person in the world that I owe an explanation to is our daughter. If
Mm.
I feel if she ever came to me and questioned me about anything that happened with the divorce or with the co-parenting and why I did this or why this happened, then I owed her an explanation. And I didn't want to be embarrassed or ashamed of anything that I did.
Mm.
I made that decision very early on. I said, I want to be able to feel good about whatever explanation that I have to give her for whatever question that she asks me. And that was my guiding light. And that I felt like that was my guiding light to the high road is I want to be able to feel okay about it. I want to still be able to feel like I'm being a good person, even in the worst situation that I could possibly be in.
Often the case, there's three of you obviously involved in this, but we often ask guests, and I'm curious then about how others can be helpful, and that is your friends and family. That is, what's the role
Mhm.
of grandparents? What's the role of aunts and uncles? What's the role of the other friends or others around? How can they be helpful for co-parenting?
I think getting on the positivity train of not bashing. I think a lot of times we confuse support for one person as vilifying the other person, and there doesn't necessarily have to be a villain. There may very well be, but we don't need to discuss. We don't everyone knows what's happening, but it's so not letting them sink into that place of anger and contempt. And there's not a whole lot of positivity that can come from that place. So being able to listen to those feelings, but then guide them into, okay, so what are we going to do now? Where are we going to go now? What do we need to do? How can I support you in this next version of your family? How can I support you in being the kind of parent that you still want to be? Making sure that people are taking care of themselves, making sure your friends are taking care of themselves, getting therapy if that's what they need to do, just being as healthy as they possibly can, both physically and emotionally, because this is a really tough time. And even tangibles like childcare. When we divorced, we were living in Ohio. I had no extended family in Ohio, and his entire extended family was in Ohio. And they had always been very, very helpful with childcare while we were married. And I didn't know if that was going to continue after we divorced. And thankfully it did. They were all very kind and very loving to me, even though we were divorced. And they still offered to babysit and they still offered to do things and to help me out, even when Sammy was with me and not with her dad. And that was just that was invaluable to me. And I think that it was good for our daughter too to see that she didn't have to feel this tension between both sides of her family.
How can you deal with, or I guess, how can co parents deal with, whether it's you or anybody else, negative emotions of their ex partner or ex spouse? How does that, you can't control them, right? But how do you deal with that yourself? How do you process it? And then how do you help the child go through it?
It sounds so my answers sound so Pollyanna, and I really don't I really don't want them to be just not reacting, not engaging in that, just going back to business. I think when things were really tough for us at the beginning of the relationship, our co-parenting relationship was very businesslike. And I think that's where a lot of people need to start. And I think that that's what works is to just not get involved in any of the emotion, not when someone's that close to you and has been that close to you, they know exactly what to say to get under your skin. So not responding when they poke the bear. You know what I mean? Don't take the bait and just okay. Like there was an example of they're always tired when they come home from your house. I don't know what time they're going to bed. And you go, you know what? I think you might be right. Maybe we should come together. We should come up with what will be a good bedtime at both of our houses so that there can be some consistency. It's really hard for someone to continue to be horrible to you if you're just decent. If
Mhm.
you're just a decent person, I think for most people it becomes really hard to just continue to just be horrible to you. So as hard as it is to just stay on that high road and remember who you are and remember how you want to feel about the way that you co-parent and the way that you interact with them and staying in that space. And again, as far as the children, I think just doubling down on your positivity and doubling down on that's that's your dad and that's your dad and I'm sure that he loves you and I'm glad that you have a wonderful relationship with him. Just doubling I think it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I
But
watched
you
my sister go through it and it's difficult.
Yeah, but I love how simple it is not engaging. Do not engage. I love how you just broke it down very simply. Don't engage in the negative.
Yeah, just and it's hard. I sometimes I felt like I was going to bite a hole through my tongue to not say what I wanted to say. And I was not successful all the time. I'm going to be very clear on that. Sometimes in the beginning, I did respond, but I think that's why I ended up getting to that place is because I did respond. And in that moment, yeah, it felt good to just just sink into that and just say all
Yeah.
the things that I wanted to say. But I walked away from it not feeling any better. We
Mhm.
haven't gotten anything accomplished. We've done nothing positive for our child. Everyone's feeling like crap. So
Yeah.
there was nothing positive that came from that at all. And I just didn't want to feel like that anymore.
Mhm.
I'm looking at my daughter like this is a person that she's going to be caught between us for the rest of her life. And I'm looking at my ex going, I don't just have to deal with him until she graduates from high school. There's going to be maybe weddings and maybe babies and holidays and all of these things. And the last thing I want my daughter to feel is that she's got to parent us and manage us because we can't manage ourselves. It's not fair for her. On her wedding day, she shouldn't be thinking about the fact that she can't have us in the same room and how she's going to keep us separated. That's awful. I don't want that for her. And so I felt like we had to, one of us has to be the bigger person. And in most of the relationships, one person's going to get on the high road first. And you're just going to have to wait up there and pray and hope and
Yeah.
lead by example and hope that they're going to join you up there. But, it's somebody's got to be the bigger person and somebody's got to do it first.
Yeah. Well, it goes into the learning, the healing, the growing through this, right? It's not going to happen, like you said, overnight. So it's
No.
just that process that you have to go through. You might make a mistake.
Yeah.
You can learn from that, right? Journal
And the
about it.
humility.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the humility of, as hard as it is, owning up to if you make a mistake, if you do something that, that didn't go the way that you anticipated, being humble enough to even to your co-parent going, you know what? I messed that up. I apologize. I'm going to try to do it differently next time.
That's a good point.
And that's a hard one.
It
But
is.
again, you and then being able to be gracious to them and offer them grace when they make mistakes because we're all going to make mistakes and there's no handbook on how to co-parent. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all trying to figure it out. We're all just floundering trying to figure out what's going to work for our families, and so there's going to be bumps in the road and there's going to be bumps and potholes and God only knows what else. And we're going to mess it up. And so to be able to apologize when you mess it up and to be gracious and offer grace when they mess it up and go, okay, we're going to learn from this and we're going to move on and not holding holding those little things against each other.
Yeah.
So that's easy to do as well.
Oh, yeah.
You had mentioned earlier about priorities, and then sometimes a partner will have a priority. And I was thinking of this because, in terms of trying to make decisions that you can make together and then decisions that you make independently, could you give us some examples of those things? Because these are the types of things that come up. What school does the child attend? Is it public or private?
Right.
What kind of vacations do they have? Could you give us some idea of how you make independent decisions, and then what other kinds of things do you do with your partner independently or then
Yeah.
codependent?
I think the big things like school, I think my I had a pretty good attorney when we were going through the separation and divorce, and she really encouraged us to get as many things as we could in writing and work those into the plan and have those discussions at the beginning, what schools she was going to go to, what kind of school she was going to go to. But again, it comes back to communication. But I think things like extracurricular activities, and I don't think it's the right thing to do for one parent to just autonomously sign a kid up for an extracurricular activity and not tell the other parent, because obviously the child's going to be with both of you at different times, and that's going to impact the other parent and getting them to practices and to games. And so that's a decision that should be made together. And vacations, I don't think I d- I feel like that's a tricky one, because I feel like I don't think I never asked my ex that if it was okay if I took this vacation, but I did say, "Hey, look, this is what I'm planning. These are the times that I'm planning it," just to as more of a, I guess, a courtesy and a level of respect, so that he knew where she was going to be at all times. And so I think that those kinds of things, obviously, if it's like going outside of the country or something, you probably want to have those discussions a little bit earlier on. But yeah, I don't know. I tend toward kind of really any decision needs to at least involve some communication when it has to do with the children. I, it's I don't know. I know that's really vague, but
No, that's
I
great.
think that's the way that has worked for me. Just because I feel like, I guess I always think about how I feel when she's with her dad, not knowing what's going on, not knowing, sitting in that place of not having any control, and how grateful I was to just have an overview of what was, just I felt a little bit better about knowing what was going on. And so that's what I gave to him when we would travel out of state to see my family. I'm like, okay, this is when we're leaving. This is the flight information. I'll let you know when we arrive. Not because I felt like I needed to check in, but because I had his child with me. And he
Mhm.
has every right to know what's going on with her and that she's safe and healthy. And that, because I would want to know that as well.
Mhm.
And I just I encourage people to give what you want back.
Darlene, you bring up a very good question. And most of the court systems, if you let's back that up a second. When you start off in a divorce and you go to court and they give you some kind of, you're not agreeing, right? We're not to this point yet of co-parenting and
Right.
being communicating and being friends. We're still in the midst of it. When we are there, the court systems usually assign a standard order that, depending on the state, can look very different, right?
Mhm.
But typically it would be somebody has visitation and somebody is the primary custodian.
Right.
Again, that's what we're working to change the law in several states, is so that it's 50-50 visitation, or 50-50 co-parenting is what we're calling it, rather than somebody visits and somebody has is a parent. But when we're in that situation and we get standard order, I don't know if you experience this, but do you think it's better for the child to go by that standard order? Or if parents can get to a place where they can co-parent and say, hey, I'm going on vacation. This is what made me think of it. I'm going on vacation for this week, and I would love to have my daughter or our son or
Mhm.
whatever during this week. Can we alter and change the dates? And can we make this work? What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is, let's be reasonable. I don't want other people making decisions about about our family. My attorney said one thing that I absolutely loved. She said, What I really try to do is work and put together the best possible parenting plan that takes into account every contingency, and we plan for everything. And then I want my clients to go home and put it in a drawer and never look at it again, because life happens and
Mhm.
people need to. And if you can get to a place where you can just be reasonable and make reasonable concessions with each other, that's so much better. Mick was always great about that. Like I said, my family didn't live in Ohio. So anytime I had family coming into town, I just say, hey, my mom's coming to visit. Even if it was time that she was supposed to be with him, he's like, absolutely. She can stay with you the whole time that your mom is there, because that's what makes sense. And
Yeah.
that's what's good for her. And so just being able, yeah. I definitely we've our situation was also a little different because we've never been able to stick to a schedule because of his job. So we've always had it's always had to be flexible. But we both have done that, have given each other the benefit of the doubt and have been really flexible because in my opinion, the only person who loses out if you're not flexible is the child. They lose out on experiences, they lose out on time, and and I feel like sometimes people are just saying no just because they can, you know, just to
Yeah.
assert that control and that power and just to be a jerk. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why?
Yeah.
Just why?
And some of the
Again,
things in the
going
standard order don't even make sense sometimes, right? Like my
right.
ex, for some reason, I was able to have the kids over Halloween, but it was written in the standard order that he got them for the 2 hours of trick or treat. And so I had to take them back for 2 hours and sit there and wait around on them to go trick or treating and then take
Right.
them back. Where my youngest son, for his birthday, said, "Hey, mom, I know I'm with you, but can I see dad? I would really," he was upset. He was crying. He's like, "I would really like to see dad on my birthday and both sides of
Mhm.
the family." So I arranged it so he could go with his dad during the morning and then come back for his party with us in the afternoon. And I'll never forget, my attorney said, "You never should have done that. You never should have given up your parenting time." And I'm thinking, but my child wanted to see both parents. And if I was the child in that position, I would want to see both parents. It's not about whose time it is, it's what's best for the child.
Right. That's oh,
Yeah,
I'm so sorry that was said to you because I could not disagree more.
yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I
who am
know,
I?
and
But I just
I
think that
was,
that's a crazy
I
thing
was
to
like you,
say.
let's do what's best for the children and that makes sense.
Right. And I think if you're in that space, I feel like the space that she's in is this space of war. Like everything that you do
Mhm.
is going to be used against you by the other co-parent. And I just, for one, am not. I was like, I'm not living like that. I'm not keeping a score sheet. I can't do it. I won't do it. That's just exhausting. And so, yeah, that's from a place of of wanting to just be at war with this person,
Yeah.
and I don't want to do that. And I always say it takes two people to make war. If you just put your weapons down, and I'm like, I'm not engaging in the war. So
I think if we
this is
didn't
what
have
I'm doing.
attorneys, we would have probably not have gone to war. We'll call
Yes,
it that, because I think the attorneys make it worse. Mine saying that so we can continue to fight, so they
yes,
continue to make money.
yes. I
But
have very
I
strong feelings
think
about that too.
yeah,
Oftentimes, I feel like they make things a lot. Our divorce took 2 years, and I think that it could have easily been done in 6 months. It was just, I think there was just a lot of ways that sometimes attorneys can complicate situations that don't need to be that complicated.
yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Trying to be really nice.
Yeah, I know. So,
But I will say it's been interesting through this journey with the book. I've had the experience of being able to talk to several different organizations of attorneys and talking to family law attorneys who really like the idea of co-parenting from the high road and want to help co-parents work together more collaboratively. And that was really, I was very excited that they were as open as they were to the message. So there's hope.
but yes, there is hope. There are some out there. Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
There's maybe a story about a boyfriend's ex-wife, but there may be something like a good story, but it also reminds me of some other things that people are curious about. Now, sometimes you want to move on. So, are there situations where there are opportunities to see someone else, and how does that complicate things, or how do you work that out? You want to date, your ex might want to see somebody, they may get remarried, all those kinds of questions.
Yeah. Hopefully, what you want is everyone to be happy in their lives, whatever that looks like. And yeah, I think most of the time people do move on to different relationships. And so I think that is something to really consider how and I don't know what the right answer is as far as when you introduce them to your children and that kind of thing. I do think the story that I wrote about in the book was I had an ex-boyfriend. Our relationship was getting pretty serious. He had has two daughters, and at the time they were 9 and 11. And their mom wanted to meet me before I met them. And at first I was really offended because I was like, she doesn't get to give her stamp of approval on me. And then I took a step back and I was like, wait a second, it's not about me as his girlfriend, it's about me as someone who's going to be around her children. And she absolutely has a right to know who's going to be around her children and be spending time with her children. And so we had coffee and it was wonderful. She's actually ended up being one of my really good friends, even though our relationship didn't last. But the other thing and so she met me and then went back to her children and told them that she met me and that she thought that I was really nice and that she thought that they were really going to like me. And that was such a gift
Yeah.
because she gave them permission to like me and not feel like they were betraying her in opening their hearts to me. And to me, so for me, it was just, as parents, we have such a huge role in how your children are going to interact with and respond to this new person in your ex-spouse's life. And so I think that being able to give them that gift, you don't have to be best friends with them, but being able to give them that gift so that your kids don't ever feel like they have to choose, or that opening their hearts to somebody else is going to somehow be a betrayal to you. I think that's really important. And so if you can, I think it's good to maybe have a conversation with your ex about how do both of you feel like you need to meet the other person before they meet your children? Some people may say, no, I don't need to. Or maybe some people will say, hey, I would really prefer that you date somebody for at least 6 months before you involve them in your children's lives. And so these are, again, comes back to sort of communication. And Mick and I never had any conversations about that as far as our daughter went. But when our relationship got serious, that relationship that I was in, I did call her dad and offer and say, hey, this is a person that I'm getting into a serious relationship with. And do you want to meet him? He didn't. And that was fine. But for me, I felt like that was the right thing to do. I think it's so much of this is whatever is going to work for you all, whatever's going to work for that particular family. But I think if you start from a place of respect and compassion and just trying to put yourself into the other person's shoes and thinking about what you would want from them in that situation, I think that's a good start.
That's an amazing story. And I appreciate you sharing because, like you said, I think the best part of it was the kids didn't have to go back and say, hey, we met dad's girlfriend or whatever, and or mom's boyfriend in this situation, but they were already told, right, that it was okay to accept that person
Yes.
into
Yeah.
their lives and given permission. And I think that's huge.
So
I
huge.
don't think that happens in a
No.
lot of situations. And I at first you're right. You would be like, oh, why are you judging me?
Right.
How do you have the permission to judge me? But you're right. You had to put on a different hat and be like, oh, wait a second. This might be beneficial. So I think that's a great story.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
absolutely. Yeah. It's still, to me, I think probably one of the biggest gifts anybody has ever given me, because I think that just paved the way for my relationship with the girls who I still have really close relationships with now, and they're 20 and 22. So
Yeah.
it was a really big gift. And I think it helped me because Sammy's dad is now repartnered, and I think that helps me. I'm always very, very encouraging of her relationship with his new partner. And I think that's been really good for her. I just feel like kids can't ever be too loved. I don't think any kids ever sat on the therapist's couch going, God, there were too many people in my life that loved me.
Yeah.
If there's somebody else in my kid's life that's going to be good to her and love her, then I'm all for it.
On that same topic, can you maybe talk about some examples of how you can show your child that they are loved by both parents?
I think doing, like I said, not speaking negatively about the other parent in front of them, and just talking to your children about, like, as your parents, even if that other person isn't there, your dad and I love you very much, including them in that conversation, I think is really important. Um, and then checking in with the children, making sure that they understand what's going on doesn't have anything to do with them, and just reminding them. I'm a big fan of telling people that I love them a lot. And so just hearing those words and being reassuring. to them. And as much as you can, I think if it's feasible, if it's something that you are able to do together, is for them to be able to see you interact with each other in a way that's not negative. Even when even when we were not on the best of terms early in the divorce, I think if there was ever something at school or ever a time that we all needed to be together, he and I were we were able to hold it together enough for her to be in the same space with her, and for her not to feel any animosity, and be able to just put that in a box and compartmentalize. And I think that was really important.
Mm.
Could you give us some idea of how and what strategies that you're thinking of that would be to prioritize the well-being of your children? What would you recommend, and what kind of strategy have you found successful?
Just really talking to them, giving them space, giving them a voice to talk about what's going on with them and talk about what they're feeling. If you're comfortable doing that with as a parent, I think that's really important. And if you feel like maybe they would benefit from talking to a counselor or a therapist, I think that's really important. But I constantly had these regular check-ins with my daughter and had her lead the conversation. And we had a thing about, she really liked to open up in the car. And I think it was because in the car that you're not looking, I'm driving, so I can't look her in the eye, and like she always says,
Yeah, it's not intimidating. You don't
it's
feel
not
like
as
you're being
intimidating.
judged
Yes.
or
And
yeah.
so we named our car Vegas. And I was like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Oh, that's cool.
You can say whatever you want. You can say it however you want. I promise that you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get judged. I'm not going to be upset, but you can say whatever you want. And my sister has a son. Went through a divorce, and they have a couch. They have the conversation couch is what they call it. And he's 14, and he will still say, I need to talk to you. Can we go to the couch? And they sit when he sits on the couch, he knows that he can say whatever it is that he needs to say. And so however you create that, but just giving them a space to say whatever they need to say and validate those feelings when they do share. I do think that groups can be really good for kids too, like support groups and stuff, talking to other kids who are going through a divorce or who have divorced parents. I think that can be really helpful. And then also, as far as yourself, staying in check with your motives about the decisions that you're making, and always going back to, okay, this decision that I'm making, is this what's best for the kid, or am I just being really petty right now and I'm doing this because but really staying in check with your motives, because anything that you do that's outside of that is going to negatively affect your child, whether it be in a little way or a large way. When you veer off that path of doing what is in their best interest, it will come back to bite you in some way. And so being able for yourself, as much as you can, to really stay in check with why you're making the decisions that you're making. And but I think communication is the biggest thing, just giving them space to talk.
You've given us lots of tips and tricks, and I've taken a lot of notes, and just was very informative. Do you have anything else as we wrap up that you would call part of your co-parenting strategy from Darlene that we want to hear that you haven't mentioned or we haven't asked?
Gosh. I think the biggest thing that I feel like I think is helpful for people to do is to just figure out how to separate the partner from the parent. They're two different roles. And if you can do that, if you can really do that, then I think that's what gets you on the high road. And being able to, I'm not saying that whatever happened in the relationship isn't important. I'm not saying that. But there's a space and a time to deal with that. And that doesn't have anything to do with your co-parenting relationship. So as much as you can, keep those things separated and really focus on and lean into the things that you want. I really do believe in where we put our focus and our energy is what we manifest more of in our lives. One of the pieces of homework sometimes I ask my clients to do is to list 5 things that you like about your co-parent. how are they a good co-parent? And really focus on those things. And it can be hard to come up with 5. Sometimes it can be hard to come up with 1.
Mhm.
When we focus on that negative stuff, that's all we're going to see.
Mhm.
And so starting to focus on how they are a good parent, how do you work together, and really, and maybe even tell them those things that you appreciate about them. Tell them, thank you for being whatever. Thank you for working with me on this or whatever. But just being able to really keep your focus on what's going right, keep your focus on the positive things that you're doing as far as co-parenting, and I think that will really build those. That will make those multiply when you're able to keep your focus on those things.
Mhm.
As we wind down here, I'd like you to give another opportunity to say something about your book so we can get some that in. But and also, is there any resources that you found in addition to your book? So please mention your book, but then other resources that you maybe have found or are available that think that you could recommend people to look into.
Yes. So the book is It's Not About Us, a co-parenting survival guide to taking the high road. That's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those places. I have a website, darlenetaylor.com, that gives a lot of information about the book and about me and about my I'm a co-parenting coach. And so about my co-parenting coaching services. And then as far as, there's so many great apps out now that help with co-parenting that weren't out when my daughter was really young. So that are just really helpful. A lot of people have heard of Our Family Wizard. There's also one called Proper Calm, which is really good when you have really high conflict divorce situations and you're not able to communicate well. It's a really good resource to help you figure out how to communicate in a healthy way between parents, which is really great. You
What's that called?
mentioned
Proper
proper
calm?
proper calm. Yep,
Okay.
proper and then COMM. And then there's a truce.com and an onward app, and those help with like money and expenses. So those can be really good because that can also be a point of contention too when you're trying to figure out how to manage money. That's difficult. But one thing I definitely did want to mention too, you mentioned at the beginning of, you were talking about a documentary that I definitely want to check out because I hadn't heard of that. But another documentary that I cannot stress enough that everyone needs to watch is called Split. And there's 2 parts. It's Split and then Split the Teenage Years. And they are interviews with children of divorce. And the first split, the kids are young. They're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're young kids. And then they re-interviewed those same children 10 years later. And it is gut-wrenching and insightful and beautifully done. But just, I really think for any parent who is co-parenting, no matter where you are in your journey, the things that you hear coming from these children's mouths, whether they're young or when they're older, just about their experiences really are just incredibly impactful. So I really love that film. That would be probably the main one that I would recommend.
Thank you. I haven't heard of that one, so thank
Yeah.
you very much. And then you mentioned something else earlier as far as resources, and I like this because I haven't heard that one either, is the children having support groups. Where do we go about finding that? So it's not therapy, because
Right.
some parents are like, I don't want to put them in therapy or whatever, but I like the support group idea because we have support groups. Mix, we've talked about that, right? When you're in a divorce, you get support group, whether it's through church or whatever.
Yeah.
But
That's
I
where I
love,
found a lot of them for children were
really,
through church. But I think that there are some counseling centers in the community that have different groups for children as well. Counseling centers that do have therapists that work with children. I know some of them do have groups as well, but I know a lot of them that I've seen have been through churches,
great.
which have been
I
good.
think that's
I
good.
think it would be an awesome thing to do at school. I'm a big fan
Yeah.
of doing things at schools because they have to be there. They're a
Yeah.
captive audience, and it's a great if you
Right.
can.
Well, and they have counselors there, so it would be great if
Right.
they could get support groups together. But I like that idea. So parents, if you're listening, check out your churches and your counseling centers. It's great.
And it doesn't have to be very a therapy type group. I
Right.
feel I feel like it might be something that you could even start for yourself if you've got
Yeah.
friends who have children who are around the same ages, and they're just giving them a space that, that you're not involved in, where they get to just vent and say how much they hate it, or whatever, just to give them a space to feel whatever they're feeling in a really unfiltered way is super helpful.
Agreed. Thank you very much for sharing, and thank you for being on today. I took away so many different nuggets and learned so much from you. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Darlene. It was awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking out some time for us.
Of course.
Bet. All right. So that was pretty phenomenal. I learned all kinds of things, and I think we all can. If you start to like the show and you like everything that we're doing, hopefully you do. So please subscribe, share, positively review, and also tell everybody about the podcast. Thanks, Kendra. It was awesome, as always. And we'll see you next time. Until next time, this is the Aftermath signing out. Deus Vult.